All right, good morning and welcome to Exploring John Wesley's Theology. We're going to look at the last three lessons. Today is our final Zoom class session together. When we get to the end of our time together, I'll kind of give you the schedule for how the class is going to wrap up, when your final assignments are due, and all of that kind of information. As I mentioned in our class last week, we're going to start with last things, and most of you have turned papers in on that particular topic. One of the things, the issues surrounding the last things is as a big tent church in the Big Tent theology in the Church of the Nazarene. This is one that causes a lot of consternation within the church. We're going to get into John Wesley's understanding of theology, or of the end times, and you're going to see how it definitely shapes what we think and believe. And if you read our last 2 or 3 articles of faith in the Church of the Nazarene, it can be at times very frustrating that we do not take a position. We are not pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib, but there is freedom for you to be pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib within the Church of the Nazarene. So if you're a hardcore pre-tribber, good for you. If you're more towards the middle or the end, good for you. You're all welcome in the Church of the Nazarene. And I think some of the struggles with that position is that, naturally, well, if I believe this and I'm a Nazarene, therefore you should believe this because you're also a Nazarene. And so we tend to, draw lines that our denomination just doesn't draw. So I think it's good that we don't take a position, but it also does cause some level of heartburn within our denomination because we don't. So the general consensus of Wesley scholars is that speculation about the end of the world falls outside of the realm of what we would consider to be Wesleyan. This is not to say that Wesley did not consider such inquiries at all. It is to say that eschatology is by nature speculative theology. And since Wesley's primary doctrine, out of which all doctrines flow, is soteriology, the doctrine of the end times is theologically relevant to Wesleyans only as it relates to our doctrine of salvation. The Church of the Nazarene has resolutely resisted demanding that its members ascribe to a certain end times theory. It gives members full liberty on this issue. In sum, that there is a final salvation is what is important, not how the final culmination of all things comes about. Wesley himself was skeptical about much of the sensationalistic enthusiasm that tended to go hand in hand with eschatology of his day. Michael Lowdahl, in his Wesleyan Theological Journal article that he published in 1994, elaborates more fully on Wesley's eschatological reservations. According to Lowdahl, it is not inappropriate to connect Wesley's eschatological considerations to his doctrine of sanctification. Lowdahl calls this reasonable eschatology. By this, he means that Wesley insisted that perfect love for God and neighbor is attainable in this life through the process and the crisis of entire sanctification. Unlike other traditions that can only hope for a day when sin will be overcome and wait for an escape from this world, the Wesleyan theology of sanctification holds to the potential of divine grace that affect us in this life, and in a sense to sanctify the value of the here and now. One might even surmise that the same impatience Wesley showed toward those who testified to being a state of perfection because they tended to rest in a past experience, he might tend towards those who tend to look ahead to some future moment of eschatological perfection. The crucial nature of the now before God can be obscured by moments either remembered or anticipated. And as Wesleyans, we very much believe in a right now and not yet. And so that kind of, again, also as we've been talking about the last other weeks, however long we've been doing this together, Wesley was very much the via media, the middle road. And that certainly comes out here in his view of the end times. Another incredibly important insight from Lodahl arises at the point of the need for continuity between Wesley's understanding of present salvation and future salvation. Lodahl rightly agrees that Wesleyan theology is thoroughly synergistic. Lodahl insightfully asks, ought we not interpret the idea of synergism in categories that are larger, more encompassing, and more cosmic than simply an understanding of the individual's relationship to God? In other words, it would make little logical sense that Wesley would insist on the dynamic between divine grace and human cooperation in his soteriology, where human free will is key, and then subscribe to a unilateral notion of eschatology where humanity sits by and waits for a preordained, predetermined end where God's absolute sovereignty is completely divorced from human activity. For this reason, scholars who have attempted to categorize Wesley's eschatology in traditional terms have placed him in the post-millennialist camp. For postmillennialism sees human cooperation in history as crucial to bringing about God's kingdom on earth. Scholars are divided as to which of the three available millennial theories Wesley finally ascribed to. His Anglican training would have placed him squarely upon an amillennialist position. Amillennialism believes that there is no actual 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, but that we stand in a figurative millennium because we stand between the first and second advents of Christ. There was a period of time when Wesley studied the work of Johann Bengel, which some interpreters categorize as a postmillennialist, in that he believed that an actual reign will commence when the church itself brings about a period of peace and righteousness on earth. At best, Wesley's endorsement of Bengel is cautious. Some Wesley scholars hold to the fact that Wesley's final conclusions represent a premillennial position, the belief that it is accompanied by the idea that the world will worsen until the return of Christ. But this, according to scholars like Randy Maddox, is a misreading of Wesley. Present-day dispensationalism would have been completely foreign to Wesley in his context. And since dispensationalism tends to focus on a prevailing pessimism about the condition of the world, it is a contra-Wesleyan. So death, immorality, or immortality, resurrection, intermediate states, and judgment. So those are the next topics that we're going to look at. So actually, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Before we get into those 5 or 6 items, what are your thoughts? Where are you at in your understanding of Wesley's stance on end times?
I think when I was younger, just starting out, I probably landed in the pre or mid-trib camp. And also that the earth would end in fire. The world would end in fire. It was flood and now fire. I don't know where I got that. If it was Sunday school, I don't know. But the more studying and time that I spend in scripture, there's no clear, yes, it will end in fire. It does say that the elements will be burned up. And then also my focus has changed from taking a stance, pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, going to end in fire. The earth was created in 6 days. My view has changed to what matters is John 14:6. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through him. We agree on that. The other stuff, we can all have a discussion.
Yeah.
And that's what matters. In love, but a discussion. And be open to that discussion with others.
Because Calvinism tends to be the predominant theological tradition for most churches that you're going to run into, Lutherans, Baptists, the prevailing theology up here, most of the larger churches are all, or most of the churches in general are largely Calvinist, and then you have a handful of us, weird Wesleyans sitting in the corner, not really. So it's very pre-trib, eternal security, divine election, and you honestly see that come out a lot in kind of mainstream Christian writings, the Left Behind series, stuff like that can take that very hardcore position. So kind of the general Christian um, stance tends to be in the pre-trib camp. And Sharon, I'm with you. When I was a lot younger, well, I'm only 45. When I was younger, um, I was definitely in that camp. And as I went through school, as I worked on my master's degree, I faded less and less from those hardcore stances, and kind of softened around the edges a lot more as I got through school. David, what are your thoughts? You're muted.
There. Reading some of his writings and stuff, I guess there's some solace in there that I don't have to be as hard and fast as I was brought up to be. I'm
Yeah,
kind of like Aaron. When I was brought up to be, it was, cut and dried to how things were. And I'm finding that the things that are more pertinent of life and living my life for Christ and living my life in tune with God, that isn't one of them. Unfortunately, that isn't the one I need to dwell on, because it's like I put, if you read in my writing, I quoted Otto Charlson, who was in our church, and his parting words, in the end, we win.
yeah,
And that's the focus there. There's a lot more to do in between. And
yeah,
so I find a lot of Wesley's stuff to be releasing
yeah.
in there, to focus on the things that are probably a lot more beneficial to the kingdom than just focusing on end times.
I preached through the Revised Common Lectionary, um, and I think last year I was doing the epistle track, if I remember correctly, and it got into Revelation and a little bit of the Peter, First and Second Peter, and those passages that bring that up coming into the Advent season. And I had a guy in my church that was just, he was destined to peg me down, and he almost had Revelation memorized. I mean, he was so much into the end times and how it was all going to happen. And he would like beeline for me after service. I've got you this time, Pastor. I've got you. I know what you are this time. And I'm like, good luck, because I don't know where I'm at. But it's kind of it is an interesting topic. But David, that's exactly kind of what we just went through, is that Wesley was more concerned about here and now. Yes, there is a final salvation, so it's in times is important in the fact of, do you know where you're going to be when it happens, and do you affirm that it's going to happen? And outside of those two things, the details really aren't that important. All right, the 18th century religious ethos emphasized, man, that not only is a Christian to live right, he or she is to die right. Thus, the title of the book by Taylor, one that greatly influenced Wesley, The Rule and Exercises of Holy Living and Dying. And if you're following along, we're at 13-2 in your student guide. The distinguishing characteristic of Christian dying is that one dies with no fear, but with a blessed anticipation of seeing Christ. Wesley's own death was a celebration event in Methodism. Wesley's speculations about the transition from this life to the next are not extensive, and certainly not dogmatic. He does reject the Platonic idea that only the soul survives death. Wesley clearly stands with the Orthodox position regarding immortality. I believe in the resurrection of the body. On what happens next, Wesley is less clear. At certain periods in Wesley's developing thought, he affirms what are known as intermediate states. By affirming this concept, he rejects the concept of soul sleep. Wesley surmises that for those whose final destiny is heaven, they await the culmination of the world and the beginning of eternity in a place called paradise. For those destined to hell, they wait in Hades. He resolutely rejected the concept of purgatory, where one could change one's future destiny by enduring present punishment or discipline. By affirming the intermediate states that he does, a theological paradox is immediately raised. If the judgment will not occur until the end of time, how is the individual assigned to either paradise or Hades? Wesley never satisfactorily answered this dilemma. Keeping with Wesley's synergistic theology, he stressed that any ultimate judgment that led to hell would only be the result of a person's deliberate choice to resist grace. One distinctive of Wesley's eschatological theology is the concept of the new creation, and we're at 13-3. Toward his later years, he shifted his hope from heaven to a future of new creation. This new creation will be an actual physical place. This is where the human destiny of eternity will play itself out. But he also suggests that animals will participate in this new creation at a higher level. As stated in Romans, all of creation has been yearning for redemption. Thus, all of creation, according to Wesley's developing thought, will thus be redeemed in actuality. It is even revisited far beyond what Eden ever actually was. Wesley also hinted at the fact that Christian growth will continue in this place. We will have already been made perfect at glorification, where sin will no longer be an issue. But a new type of growth will be made possible. As Maddox states, progression in our abilities and maturity is so central to what it means to be human that we will surely continue to progress in the life to come. Thus, synergism, although in a new form, will continue on into eternity. All right. Any questions from that material?
I just wanted a clarification. On Hades, you said that that's a waiting place for hell. Paradise, did you say that's a waiting place for heaven, or paradise is equivalent to heaven?
Okay, so at certain periods in Wesley's developmental thought, he affirms what are known as intermediate states. By affirming this concept, he rejects the concept of soul sleep. Wesley surmises that for those whose final destiny is heaven, they await the culmination of the world and the beginning of eternity in a place called paradise. So he's saying that paradise is kind of that intermediate state before heaven, and that Hades is the intermediate state before hell. Does that clarify or make things worse?
No, that clarifies. I knew I had caught that Hades was a waiting place for hell. I just wanted to make sure that I caught that paradise was the waiting place for heaven. And I would imagine the new heaven and the new earth, but for heaven.
Okay. So I think I've seen most of your assignments. I'm looking really, really quick. You guys got your summaries done, the sermons. Did you get the body of them done, the sermon body? Is that correct? Yes, you have
Yes, but we weren't supposed to turn the body in. Is that right?
You have it though. You have it done.
Have it done.
Okay.
Yes, but
All right. So there's Jordan's Jordan's driving, so I'm not gonna have her do the small I'm not gonna have her try and do the small group small group discussion. So I'm not gonna throw you into a breakout room because it's just the three of you. I'm assuming David's upside down, but I think David can participate. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to mute myself, both my audio and my video, and let the three of you discuss the sermon body of your sermons that you guys have been working on.
I'm going to pull mine up real quick.
Yeah, so if you want to grab those, because you already went over the introductions, we did that in a group assignment. So now you're going to share your sermon body with each other and kind of discuss that. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to do that. So I will bring you back at 11:15. So I'll give you almost 20 minutes. And I will pause the recording and let you guys do that. All right, we're going to wrap up our session for end things. And so next we're going to look at Wesley's understanding of church and pastoral ministry. And so your first homework assignment is, what is the church? And that's a big C, church. And there's a difference between big C church and little c church. And we'll get into that in a little bit. What is a pastor? And hopefully you've had a chance to read at least portions of Resource 13.4. My notes say it was fairly lengthy. I didn't look at it, but I think it was a fairly long sermon. So to kind of wrap things up, Wesley's view of the future, a new earth, is laced with scriptural references of hope. Suppose now the fullness of time to become and the prophecies to be accomplished, what a prospect this is. Here is no din of arms, no confused noise, no garments rolled in blood, no country or city divided against itself and tearing out its own bowels. Here is no oppression to make even the wise man mad, no extortion to grind the face of the poor, no robbery or wrong, no rapine or injustice, for all are content with such things as they possess. Thus righteousness and peace have kissed each other. They have taken root and filled the land, righteousness flourishing out of the earth, and peace looking down from heaven. And that's from John Wesley's sermon on spiritual Christianity. And I think that's one of the things to remember as we look at end times. That should always be with hope in mind. I'm currently reading through the book of Revelation in my personal devotion. And one of the commentaries that I use to do that constantly reminds that Revelation is in the context of worship. And Eugene Peterson wrote a book called Reversed Thunder that walks through the book of Revelation completely in the context of worship. So if we think of the end of the world as that final consummation when we worship God, then it sets everything else. It's a whole lot less scary and weird if the end is hope, if the end is worship, if that's where our goal is. All right, I'm going to give you guys a 5-minute stretch break, get up, move around a little bit. We'll come back at 11:20 and we will begin our next lesson, which is looking at life in the Christian community, talking about the church and clergy. So we'll have a 5-minute break and come back. All right. Welcome back, and we are now at lesson 14, life in the Christian community, and we are going to begin with a discussion about the church. So using scripture, tradition, reason, or experience to answer these questions. So what is the church? And that's with a big capital C.
I would say it's the bride of Christ that's comprised of everyone who believes that Jesus will come from every nation, culture.
Okay, it was a little garbled to hear, but I think I kind of got the gist of what you were saying. Anyone else on what is the church? Capital C.
Yeah, I'm with David there. It is though the church is those who have accepted Jesus Christ, who have entered into that relationship there that gives a commonality between others. There, they have everything in common at that point and serve in that capacity. Um, it has little bits of tweaks here and there, but um, it still is. They all have commonality of being believers in Jesus Christ.
Okay. Anything else
Like
on what the church
like
is?
a family,
Okay.
and just like in a traditional family, you all have different parts and different that you play in the family, but you belong, the big C, you all belong to the same family. And I think as David said, it was just a little bit garbled, but I think as David said, the bride of Christ, it's just we all might look, like David Baker said, we all might look a little different, just as we do in a traditional family unit.
Yeah. So Big C Church refers to the universal Christian church. So does a Wesleyan perspective influence how we develop an ecclesiology? An ecclesiology is the study of the church. So does it affect does a Wesleyan perspective influence how we develop an understanding of the church?
Well, I believe so. I mean, that's what would make us a unique part of that large church is our understanding and how we perceive it. And as we share that with others, we're going to share according to where our belief and understanding is, which is how we've been taught on that. So, I'm not going to probably share as a Baptist very well or a Lutheran or whatever. I've been raised, in this tradition.
Uh-huh.
However, I need to be using the same basis as anyone else is a member of the large C, large church. There needs to be the underlying tone of all that.
Do any of you um, do any of you do community-wide services with multiple denominations in your communities?
In
We
years past,
have a bike and trike that's coming up. It's not multiple, but we do have another church that comes in with us um, as a community event. People from the church, I guess I should say, not necessarily the umbrella of the church, but people from the church that comes and helps us.
being brought up, we did a service in the park once a
Yeah.
year that involved 5, 6, 7 different churches, and all the pastors and everything all participated in that. And the message was brought alternating different pastors each year on that. So to an extent, yes.
So
The Easter sunrise service is usually like a community-wide.
Sunrise is an excellent example of that um, broader service that crosses denominational lines, where Big C Church shows up. We have one of those in the summer, and the first year that I was here, I preached. The Methodist pastor kind of hosted, the AG pastor read scripture, the Lutheran pastor served communion. So we all participated uh, in different ways, but we're the larger body of Christ. And I think, especially as Wesleyans, those are very important opportunities for us to participate in our community. So, what is the purpose of the church?
I think the Great Commission to go and tell others and create disciples. I know that sounds really basic. It sounds basic, but yeah. And along the way, of course, helping and um, being there for people, taking care of people.
Okay. Evangelism. Yep, that's a good one. Yeah, you can, David, throw as much as you can in the text chat, and that'll work. So what are kind of the functions of the church?
I would agree. Having a platform for evangelism of that. The larger church and the pieces of the larger church look different, even within the same denomination, look different.
Yeah.
Our church looks different than your church or
Yeah.
Sharon's church or David's church. However, we're building a common platform for those to see and accept Jesus Christ for evangelism out there to change lives. And then our function from that point is to take them forward and to nurture them, to help them grow, to build, and for them to do likewise. Not just to be spectators, to take them from spectator to participant.
Yeah, Hayden is a different context than Colville or Walla Walla. So the context is different. We minister in a different context. Even, Spokane is about 70 miles south of me. The context that David operates under in Spokane is going to be very different than mine up here in Colville. So our context is different. And David chimed in, the church should be the source that struggling people look to when they need help. Prayers, family assistance, education support. Sadly, government has stepped in where the church should be. That's an excellent point. All right, we're going to dive into this lesson. So Wesley's views on the church. While Wesley certainly had a conception of the church that could be found in his sermons and treatises, his ecclesiology shows more clearly in the very real need to work out the relationship between the Church of England and the Methodist societies. As with many of Wesley's theological tenets, his concerns were practical rather than theoretical. John Wesley was an Anglican at birth, and by his own admission would be an Anglican until the day he died. And yet, in 1784, the American Methodists broke with the Church of England with John's approval. It was only after his death that the British Methodists would follow the Americans. What would bring John to such a radical decision, one that caused he and his brother Charles to be at odds for the rest of their lives? From the very beginning of the Methodist movement, John saw their identity as a renewal movement within the Anglican Church. Wesley developed societies that acted in many ways like congregations. The societies met together for preaching meetings. They broke into smaller groups for accountability and spiritual formation. The societies fellowshipped together, served the world together, and served each other in very specific ways. And yet, Wesley would not have seen these societies as churches. Unity with the Church of England was extremely important to him, despite their veiled rejection of him and their outright decision to bar him from Anglican pulpits. Wesley wanted his Methodist people to see themselves as Anglicans. Whatever they might do during the week in Methodist meetings, he demanded that all Methodists attend Anglican worship services on Sundays in order to receive the Eucharist. When the Revolutionary War broke out in the colonies, Anglican clergy returned to England. By this time, Methodist meeting houses crisscrossed the 13 colonies and beyond. Wesley was deeply concerned that these Methodists would be deprived of the sacraments in light of the absence of clergy, and so he allowed the ordination of preachers as Methodists. Methodism became its own denomination, and Wesley was willing to sacrifice church unity in order to serve the practical need of his people to have access to the sacraments. So why did the Church of the Nazarene break from Methodism?
I'm going to take a shot in the dark. Not sure. I think because they became a little too liberal in their thoughts and left that middle of the way.
Okay. David, you're muted.
John Wesley also talked about relationships and the relationship with God, much more than the Church of England would allow. That was not a focal point in the Church of England. It was not a part of it. However, I find it very interesting that in wanting to break away and start that separation started long before they actually separated. It wasn't a last minute deal. But the fact that he encouraged them to go back to the Anglican Church and accept the Eucharist, because that was a focal point in their lives. So, there were some pieces that were not bad. Separation really became hardcore when the relationship was not allowed necessarily. That was not preached, nor was it taught.
So why did we, the Church of the Nazarene, break away from Methodism?
Or why did we break away from Methodism? Great question.
So, Sharon, you're right. I'll tell you that this time. You're right. You got the right answer. We broke away. I usually don't do that, but this time you got it out of me. Yes, you are correct. We broke away because a lot of Methodist preachers at the time, Phineas Bresee being the primary one, felt that the Methodist Church had lost their way and there was a drift. I had a lady in my church who she just passed away, I think last year at the age of 110. And so she was a Methodist and left the Methodist Church to join the Church of the Nazarene. In fact, her and her husband, I think, were charter members of our church in Eugene. Because of that exact reason, the Methodist Church had lost their way. They were on a slow drift that some Methodist preachers could see, and like Bresee, broke from the Methodist Church and formed the Church of the Nazarene. That's where, with Bresee and especially in the West, that's kind of where the Church of the Nazarene formed, was a break from Methodism for that reason. So good job. So given that, what then is church unity? Big C church.
Well, I think that, it says it best, if I can say it, in essentials, unity. So if I'm speaking to a Methodist, if I'm speaking to a Baptist, if I'm speaking to a Nazarene, do we agree that Jesus Christ is our Savior and that's how we get to heaven? And do we believe that we need Him? So beyond that, the big C, we're going to have those differences. Well, you're going to soul sleep. Well, you're going to immediately be with Jesus. I see it in our own church about creation. Yeah. 6 days, 6,000.
Yeah.
That's where we need the discussions. And to be able to do that in love. And I think when you're working with the big C, most of the time you can have that.
So even before the American split, Wesley was deliberate and diligent about training his lay preachers and society leaders. He wanted them to be as educated as possible, intentional about their preparation, but also recognize the need for gifts and graces that only come from God. It is the church that confirms the inward call by examining outward fruits of ministerial labor. So we're going to look at a partial list of qualities outlined in Wesley's address to clergy, and this is resource 14-1 in your student guide. So I'm going to go through this list real quick. So his clergy should have a good understanding, sound judgment, and the capacity for reasoning, discernment, good memory, a deep understanding about the nature of a pastoral call, a deep knowledge of the scriptures, knowledge of the original biblical languages, knowledge of the sciences, philosophy, and logic, knowledge of the patristic writers, knowledge of personalities and character in people. I love number 10, common sense. Sometimes that gets left out. 11, courtesy and scholarship, single-mindedness, love for God and neighbor, desire for personal holiness, and a desire to cooperate with God's grace. So is Wesley neglecting anything you see as crucial? perhaps in light of today's context?
I just had to chuckle because in the sermon he also mentioned a good voice, like a good singing voice, and he did say that that can be trained. A good speaking voice, you very definitely need to train in that. But I just found it kind of funny that he said you need to be a good singer.
Yeah, well, if it comes to training and being a good singer, I would be out of luck. That's
Exactly what
I've
I was
never been
thinking.
accused of
Oh
even
man, I
coming
failed.
close.
That's why I chuckled when I
Yeah.
read it.
The internal
I don't-
functions go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think he left out anything in there that are essential or added, whatever. I think a lot of things are included in each of those 15 points in there. And some are kind of overrun by the others, but I think the whole idea behind that is that you have someone that is complete
Okay.
to go
Yeah.
out there as opposed to sending someone out who isn't equipped. It isn't it's like us if we'd ordain ministers and say, yeah, you were close. You kind of you did pretty good with some of the things, and people really did kind of like you. You couldn't sing, but that's okay, type of thing. And we ordained them and gave our blessing and says, man, you will do great. That he wanted to avoid that
Yeah.
because this is the church's reputation is on the line, really, when you think about it. That there's a and we do no different than what he did.
I love the list if you look at it. It starts with very practical things.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
then as you move down through it, it comes to the most important of loving God, neighbor, holiness, and grace.
Yeah.
Yes, the practical things matter. Try to sing, try to, the
Common
practical
sense.
things matter, common sense. But man, when you get down to that 13, 14, and 15, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. Good. So looking at spiritual formation, the internal functions of the church can be placed under two main categories: spiritual formation and Christian education. These are intertwined in significant ways, but for our purposes here, we will define spiritual formation as progress in holiness and Christian education as the knowledge, doctrinal, theological, practical, that aid in that process or in that progress. As you will learn from other modules that deal more specifically with issues of spiritual formation, such formation is at the very heart of Wesleyanism. Works of individual piety, means of grace, such as prayer and devotion, scripture study, devotional reading, and practicing the presence of God, will lead to works of mercy, also means of grace, such as caring for the sick, feeding the hungry, and ministering to the needs of others in general. This is the breathing in and the breathing out of the spiritual life, so to speak. In a Wesleyan context, we also add the interdependence we have on our fellow Christians as integral to our own growth in holiness and love, to be formed spiritually in a communal as well as an individual process. To be formed spiritually is the process of sanctification that continues until we die. This was Wesley's goal, for his Methodist people to go on to perfect love and then to go on from there living out the sanctifying love they had experienced. For Wesley, this is impossible without the church. So Wesley on Christian education, and now we're on 14-3. Also integral to Wesley's understanding of the church is the church's responsibility to teach its people very deliberately. Wesley's mother was dedicated to education. Wesley valued his own education very highly. Wesley demanded the education of his ministers, and Wesley expected that education would take place within the societies and bands. Education was at the foremost of Methodism. In no sense whatsoever is Wesleyanism anti-intellectualistic. As Charles once wrote, unite the pairs so long disjoined, knowledge and vital piety. Knowledge and devotion are both crucial to the Christian life. Wesley wanted his people to know a wide range of topics, from the Methodist interpretation of the Articles of Religion to how to correctly interpret Scripture to the great devotional classics of the previous centuries. To latest understanding of holiness discussed at the latest Methodist conference. Much of what Wesley published was for the educational benefit of his people. So how are our local Nazarene churches doing in terms of this broader understanding of Christian education?
I think, are you talking the personal church or Church of the Nazarene?
The local Nazarene church. So
Like,
how is
like,
your local Nazarene church doing in terms of that broader understanding of Christian education?
we have a great sermon every week, and then we do have some apologetics classes, but I'm not sure on teaching, about the Church of the Nazarene. If we have new membership, then we teach on. So I don't know. I don't know how we're doing. If I had to give it a number, I would probably say 5 or 6.
So is there active discipleship, Sunday school, small groups, discussion, the whole as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another? Is there education taking place in the local church?
Yes, we
there
do
is.
have a.
I don't think we're doing it to the extent that we should be,
Okay.
or to the effectiveness that we should be.
Oh, okay.
I see. It's just like I love church reports at the end of the year, and that's tongue in cheek. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
When it asks for how many small groups do you have,
Yeah.
the number on ours was 9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, wow.
Now let me explain 9 to you though. One of those is a men's coffee time that has no education, no anything. They all just drink coffee.
Yeah.
Okay. There's some benefit to that.
Yeah.
But when you read 9, my first thought is when people have numbers on there is, wow, they have 9 Bible studies where they're learning and digging in and that type of thing. Sometimes our expectation is skewed of what should be there, and our reports are skewed because they don't give the real picture. And if you had to ask our congregation about the Nazarene Church, you probably get about 40% or less that could tell you that it really were a Nazarene church.
Okay.
There's no education, no real education in that. Membership literally is an hour and a half long.
Okay.
I feel like in our church, I didn't hear the beginning of your question, but we do have a lot of classes. Like we have learning and growth classes on Sunday mornings. We have classes on Wednesday nights, small group.
Okay.
And our new pastor, it's been his desire to have a continual class for like newcomers, not new members, but just people coming in. But we started a continual class, like what is a Nazarene, that's taught by one of our pastors. And I said I think that almost everybody in the church needs to almost go to that class, not even if we're new to the church, but just as a refresher as well. So I mean, I know there's always a lot of improvement, but
yeah,
we seem to have continued always with those smaller groups of learning and growth.
One of the things that I've done in my last 2 churches is the summer prior to General Assembly, I preach through the 16 Articles of Faith and then have a small group discussion Sunday night or Wednesday night to discuss those Articles of Faith. Because it's easy for us just to kind of drop off our, what we believe if it's not kind of in front of us on a regular basis. All right, so you at some level worked through the address to the clergy in your student guide. And so I have one question for you, and I'm gonna leave you in the group that you're in because our class is small today. and then I'll just mute myself and step out for about 10 minutes. So you are to work together to find the paragraph in Address to the Clergy where Wesley talks about each of the qualities found in resource 14-1. And so if you go to 14-1, I can find it real quick. So those are the qualities of the clergy. We just went through those 15. So what you're looking for is the paragraph that talks about those. And what I'm really looking for is which quality spoke to you. So of those 15, just one of those, what quality spoke to you? And is there any quote within that text that really speaks to you? So I'm going to give you, because we do have it's going to be noon and we still have one more lesson to get through. So I'm going to shorten you down. I'm only going to give you 10 minutes and we're going to be done at noon with this lesson. So that is your small group exercise, is to talk about one of those qualities of clergy that speaks to you. And if there's a quote from that, and I will be back at noon to wrap things up.
Yeah, let's go on.
Okay, so we're going to come back and wrap up this lesson, and then for time, we're just going to move right into the final lesson and try and get through this as expeditiously as we can. So your homework assignment out of that particular lesson is a 1 to 2 page essay on what is social justice. During Wesley's lifetime, the words liberal and fundamentalist were not used in the same way that they are used in the church today. Wesley would see himself different in those references than they do get applied today. So we're going to move into the final lesson called Life in This World. So what are the particular functions of the church that address the needs of the world? What we may call the external functions of the church.
Compassion, social activity, ranging from meeting needs of the community that aren't necessarily spiritual needs as such, being involved with people's lives in disaster and in good times.
Okay.
And that reminds me, last week, David, when we prayed about what your church was or is trying to do, and when we talked earlier, when David brought up the governmental roles, that's the church's responsibility, and the government's taking that away, because that's something beautiful that your church was trying to do. And I'm not sure how it turned out, so I don't know if I should be saying was or is.
Well, let me give you a quick update. We had a meeting with the city, and Dirk and I were kind of anticipating a little bit of a fight to go down there. We didn't want to, but we got there. It was a great meeting. The rules far as the buildings themselves, we can't change. But they worked to find ways for us to continue with the ministry, other alternatives. Some were a little more expensive or whatever, but nowhere they were in favor of what we do, how we do it. We found out that one of them, his father was a minister in many years down in Northern California, and we had a good relationship there. And the other one sits on the board at one of the Lutheran churches here. So there's some things we didn't know in their lives, and they gave us a lot to think about of some additional properties, etc. The only thing we don't have is those buildings we currently have don't qualify, and it isn't the ministry that's the problem, it's just the construction of it, which it wouldn't make any difference who was doing it. That would have been a problem. So we can't throw enough money at that. So we're backed up a little bit, but again, she even brought out all the things that shows in the code that we can do.
Yeah.
So we were good. It was a very encouraging meeting. So thanks for the prayers. I really appreciate that.
So Wesleyanism is thoroughly optimistic. Those who hold to Wesleyan theology hold to a belief in God that emphasizes the depth and breadth of his love for all of humanity. It emphasizes that God's grace can truly transform an individual from the inside out, that true sanctification is possible in this life. It believes in the growth and maturity that can come from spiritual formation and the means of grace. It believes in the community of faith as a place where love is genuinely expressed and needed are truly met through mutual accountability and acceptance. Wesleyan theology is optimistic, intensely optimistic, not only about individual transformation, but also social transformation, about the difference perfect love can make, not only in the individual's life and in the church, but also in the world. Every aspect of Wesley's relentless focus on an individual's holiness was for the purpose of making that individual an agent of perfect love to those around him or her. Inward transformation, if it were real and sustained, necessarily led to what Wesley would call acts of mercy, as he is so often quoted to say, there is no holiness but social holiness. The heated admonition of particular acts of service in the world permeated the ethos of Methodism, not only in the time of Wesley, but also in the next century and beyond. Scholars are now recognizing that well before what is known as the social gospel movement of the early 20th century, a movement associated with liberal Protestantism, Methodism, and the holiness movement of the late 19th century in particular, evangelized the downcast, assisted the needy, ministered to the sick, fed the poor, advocated for the oppressed, and sought liberation for slaves and women, all in the name of perfect love for God and neighbor. For our purposes here, we will delineate those acts into evangelism, compassionate ministry, social justice, and liberation. It is not coincidental that we end on this lesson, for the totality of Wesleyan theology drives us towards touching real lives with real love. So Wesley's view on evangelism. It is fair to wonder if Wesley had not been barred from Anglican pulpits, would he ever moved into preaching in the fields? Would the world as his parish? What we can be sure of is that after 1738 and Aldersgate, Wesley saw the necessity of preaching salvation and its assurance. In most respects, he absolutely lined up with the great evangelists of his age, including Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. He called persons to faith in Jesus Christ. His is, without a doubt, an evangelical call to new birth and new creation. He told his lay preachers, you have nothing to do but to save souls. Therefore, spend and be spent in this work, and go always not only to those you want to, but to those that want you most. Observe, it is not your business to preach so many times and to take care of this or that society, but to save as many souls as you can, to bring as many sinners as you possibly can to repentance. But unlike his Calvinist contemporaries, Wesley's understanding of salvation represents a broader, more holistic view. By salvation, I mean not barely, according to the vulgar notion, deliverance from hell or going to heaven, but a present deliverance from sin, a restoration of the soul to its primitive health, its original purity, a recovery of the divine nature, the renewal of our souls after the image of God in righteousness and true holiness, in justice, mercy, and truth. Evangelism for Wesley must lead to places of new believer into a method of spiritual formation if its results are to be lasting. The genius of Methodism, and that for which its significant and lasting growth can be attributed, is small groups, bands, and classes that connected new confessing Christians to the means of spiritual growth. So Wesley on compassionate ministry. Now, there is no doubt that Wesley's evangelistic concerns were specifically directed towards the poor. And yet it would have been unthinkable and unconscionable for Wesley to have preached the good news of the gospel without also attending to the basic physical needs of his listeners. But even more than that, Wesley believed that not only was the good Methodist service to the poor necessary, life with the poor was absolutely requisite for a genuine Christian disciple. According to Theodore Jennings, Wesley could no more imagine a week without visiting the hovels of the poor than he could a week without participating in the Eucharist. His commitment was relentless. Wesley could say, "The honorable, the great, we are thoroughly willing to leave you. Only let us alone with the poor, the vulgar, the base, the outcasts of men." Methodists gave to the poor, lived with the poor, and preferenced the poor. This was a matter of principle for Wesley, biblically based and theologically sound, but it was driven by contact with real persons whom Wesley called his people to love in the name of Christ. The Church of the Nazarene was founded with a similar driving agenda. It is only with deliberate thought and action that we will remain faithful to our roots. Wesley was interested not only in feeding, clothing, and caring for poor, but also in rectifying and reforming the social structures that kept them poor. It was and is not good enough to call such oppressive structures an unfortunate result of the evil in the world that came as a result of the fall. Specific intentional acting for what has come to be known as social justice must be at the heart of Wesleyan theology. In the 1980s, 100 million children died from poverty. As a point of reference, 12 million people died in the Nazi Holocaust. A Holocaust of neglect plagues this world. National, political, institutional structures contribute to this horrific reality. It is the Christian's responsibility not only to work to alleviate the symptoms of suffering, but also to alleviate the reasons for the suffering. This applies personally, locally, and globally. So do you have any additions or comments from the essay that you wrote? And I don't think you've written the essay yet on social justice. So we're a little bit ahead of the game on that question. So I will stop and ask, what are your thoughts on social justice? Because Wesley's definition of social justice tends to be a little bit different than what we would consider social justice to be today.
I liked when he says, rectifying and reforming the social structures that kept them poor. If we can work with people, it's give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach him to fish. And I think that's what we need to do is, yes, help in the immediate need. Absolutely. We can't just say bless you and move on. So help in the immediate need. But if there is anything that we can do to help, almost again, going back to what David and that housing, helping them get into a new life.
I was just going to bring that up, that's an excellent example of social justice, is it's helping people to change their lives and to change the structures that are keeping people homeless. There's a church in Portland that has segmented a section of their land for tiny homes to be built on their church property. And they've worked very tirelessly with the city and the county for zoning and all of that stuff. And that's an example of what Wesley would consider social justice, is moving in a direction that changes those structures that are keeping people where they're at.
I was just chatting in kids' church last week about, we've been talking about like loving our city and talking about the difference between a hand up and a hand out. And I really think that's just to be thinking of that, like what can we do to help them, not just give them something that's just going to be short term and make life easy, but help them in the long run, which a lot of kids, I mean, it took a little bit for them to figure that out, but just lots of examples of, things that we can do to help somebody forever, not just right in the moment.
Well, and being able to hang in there with them, because it's not going to be, oh, great, let me help you, and this perfect walk out of poverty into something successful. When they do fall, be right there with them and say, that's okay. I had the privilege of walking with someone in addiction, and they would fall and just feel horrific about it. And I would explain to them, you know, you've fallen, you get one more chance to stand up. There's going to come a day when you're not going to have to stand up, you're not going to fall, but right now you're in that place. And it was a blessing to me as much as a blessing to watch them go through it.
So now we're going to look at liberation theology, and please just hang with me through this section. Since the 1960s, various theologies have arisen that have now come to be known as liberation theologies. They are characterized by the doing of theology from a particular context, a context from within a marginalized group. Although some of these have developed into complex theological reflection, for each the practical known as praxis, liberation of the oppressed, remains the ultimate goal. So the examples are feminist theology, Black theology, South American liberation theology, Asian theology, and Latino theology. Scholars have made connections between the ethos of these movements and the ethos of John Wesley's optimism regarding social transformation. Wesley advocated for Black slaves in England and America, and he is recognized as a rather progressive feminist in light of his views on women and men's spiritual and ecclesiastical equality, and his sanction of women's right to preach. As has been stated, he sided with the oppressed, the poor, the outcast of society. There's definitely a theme of liberation in Wesley's individual and social vision, flowing out of his optimism about true liberation from the power of sin in this life. He envisioned social liberation for certain classes and marginalized groups, and he demanded that his Methodist people work for such human freedoms. And yet, unfortunately, popular evangelical Christianity today is sometimes known more for its individualism, its escapist mentality, its separationist tendencies, and even its hate for the other. Wesleyan theology offers a different paradigm. In the Church of the Nazarene, as an evangelical but not fundamentalist church, has opportunity to make a difference in the world's perception of Christianity. Holiness and perfect love, as taught and lived by John Wesley and his followers, is not only our past, but also our future, if we let it guide us, not just as our distinctive, but as our directive. And again, like social justice, liberation theology gets a really different definition today than John Wesley's definition of liberation. All right. So I haven't given you a chance to do that small group exercise. Hey guys, we're done. Congratulations. You have made it to the end of exploring John Wesley's theology, and thank you for hanging in with me. I had an absolute privilege teaching this class, and thank you all for putting up with me as my first course of study class that I've been able to teach. And just on a personal note, kind of because of this class and how much I did thoroughly enjoy walking through this with you, I have applied to enter into an NU's Doctorate of Theology program in
Congratulations.
September to hopefully continue teaching. So you've got all of the homework lessons for 13, 14, and 15 in your student guide. There was one that, because it was a group exercise, you were going to write a paper on the words liberal and fundamentalist. Because that paper is for a group discussion, I'm going to give you a pass. You don't have to do that paper because the purpose of the paper was to formulate in order to have a group discussion off of it. So we'll just skip that one. But everything else in there, you do need to get done. So here is the calendar Next week, I am at NNU's graduation. My wife has completed a master's in teaching, and so we are headed to NNU for her to walk. And so I will be in no position to finish up your papers and provide final feedback. And it is a lot. You're doing three lessons. And so everything needs to be turned in to me by May 10th at 11:59. So basically Friday night before you go to bed, I need you to have everything turned in, whether that's 11:59 or 8:59.
Do you want our journals or some proof of journal, or what do you want?
Yes, if you would provide some proof of journaling, that would be fantastic. If we were in person, I'm supposed to look at your journals, but not actually read your journals. But if you just want to submit some proof that you've been journaling throughout the class, I don't really care what that is. I'm going to scan it. I'm not going to read it with any depth, but it just helps me see that yes, you've been doing this. So maybe like grab a snippet at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end. Any other questions? Everything's due May 10th. It is, like I said, it's been an absolute privilege to walk through this class with you and to teach this class. And hopefully, and again, thank you to the few of you that introduced yourself to me at District Assembly. That was a lot of fun to meet you in person. And hopefully I'll have a chance to teach another class. So if there's nothing else, we are done.
Cool.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And you were much taller in person. And
Yes.
that's what I heard from people too. Oh, you're much taller in person than I guess we just see each
Yes.
other, you know,
I'm about
setting. So
I'm about 6'3".
yeah, yeah. And congrats on going to NNU.
We'll see if it all works out. I'm still waiting for my application to see if I've been accepted. Anything else?
No, you made theology enjoyable.
Oh, wow. Thank you. You have my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. If you have any questions over the next 2 weeks as you wrap up this class, I will provide final comments on all of your stuff. And then I'll turn in it's basically pass, no pass to the district office for this course.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys. And we're done.
Enjoy your day.
You too.